Ever. Well, I want to see what is on here.
Well, but that's.
What's marked? Usually it's he made it, you mean? He made it?
Yeah, this is all this stuff.
When I was a comedian in Allen Park, the kids used to make their own blessing cups for Eucharist. And we had leftover clay. So Ben Monty was our adult ed coordinator tonight. Sat down and made stuff. So I did a plate and I put figures in Eucharistic figures like bread, the wine, and grapes, and then I did a cup too. So
I wasn't trying to shut you out, really.
when my nieces were
I wasn't
babies,
trying to
my
shut
niece
you
made
out.
fun of it. My first son, when he would take our, classes and bring this ashtray home, I went, this was my work of art.
These are prints. The back of this is kind of special.
I've never been an icon person.
No, I haven't either, but then I don't know that much about it.
Well, when I was in Petoskey, there was a big workshop on it. But I just wasn't a cup of tea, so I said,
That's confusing.
and it takes time.
And that was a little bit after 2 years of donation. Mother
You're allergic to us?
I was allergic to
No, I
us, so I thought I was.
Well, I'll have one too, and then you don't have to feel it.
Nobody would even know.
Is that real? Is that real? I forgot they were dark. I had them too. And I asked my brother to pick up some and he brought me. He said, well, these were on sale. They were the minor. So I've been using them for 4 years because it was, and he didn't want them.
What's that? Where is this everybody? I don't think I have people coming here.
No, probably
And I didn't need to get somewhere. Oh, I took it today.
well, don't you think Mary Chamberlain is over there?
No, I'm in charge.
Oh, well, you're in charge of lunch.
No, I'm not in charge of lunch. I'm in charge of tomorrow. Nobody has to be in charge after that. I just need somebody to show them how to get there. And one trip is not enough. That's a big, complicated trip.
Oh, he comes to our
No, he comes to our place for lunch, Emmanuel Village.
Oh, okay.
So he has to walk all the way over there. That's complicated.
Ordinary.
Well, you just have to invite somebody.
No, she's got something else to do. Marcia, are you going to lunch at Emmanuel Fontenelle tomorrow where you always go? Or are you going to be busy doing this?
The village, not Emmanuel Fontenelle.
Oh, that's right. Are you going to the village for lunch? Well, I'll see. I don't want to burden you with something else, but I don't mind anyone else. Would you be willing, would you be willing to walk him over for lunch, or you can't do that? I think you got enough to do.
So if I talk like this, can everybody hear me pretty well?
Yeah.
Will that work? So this is part of the chapel system, I guess, huh? Okay, very good. Well, yeah, I'll kind of focus you into the center part here, so you can kind of see me. And then at each table, we have kind of 3 items I'm going to kind of make references to. Ukrainian eggs, pottery, and then iconography. So these kind of 3 mediums we're going to make some references to. But today, this presentation, in your silent retreat, you're taking a little break because now we're given another focus. Rather than Nazareth, maybe that's getting tired for you already. there's a richness in that one, but this is another opportunity to see a spirituality, a creativity. That's what I'm calling it. So I don't know, maybe some of you done some artwork or painting. Anybody does that? Pottery, perhaps. I think someone was making reference to even some of the mandalas where they're coloring and things to this. That's kind of popular again. In all of these, there's something about seeing these things of the arts to help us express ourselves. Huh? And so in some way, I find that's what spirituality is about. Who are we, and how do we use and express ourselves? So this is kind of a presentation I put together for a group here in Omaha called the Omaha Artists Association or something. It's a group of Catholic artists that are meeting now, younger people. I was the old person in the group, which is inspiring to see that there's because sometimes art looks like it's separate from faith, or it's somehow beyond that, or it's anti. But here people are saying we come with faith and we want it even to be expressed in art. And when you think about it, some of the great masterpieces of art, I would say, are ultimately inspired by faith. Now, some are going to say, no, the church sponsored it, so that's why they presented these. But I think there's a deeper part of this, too, where you take someone like Fra Angelico or someone like this. He was a man of faith who expressed his faith in images, in art. So this is kind of the idea behind my putting together. There was a great article, and I couldn't find the magazine. Like some of you sisters were talking about, you just got moved in different rooms and all that. So you kind of know the experience. I know I have the magazine somewhere, and it's in a very safe place, but I don't know where it's at. But I made a reference to it because it was in Human Development magazine. Some of you may have gotten that magazine sometimes. It's been a couple years ago. But there was an article written there by a Jesuit, Father Mark George, and he wrote about, I think the title was Art and Spirituality. And then I kind of titled this little talk, Art is Spirituality. So I kind of make the verb out of it. So ultimately it's an expression of a person. I don't know whether every piece of art is the expression, but I suppose you could say when you see even little Johnny drawing something or little Mary making some kind of a decorative thing, it's an expression of something in them wanting to be made. One of my fond memories of school sisters of St. Francis, and some of those sisters were quite artistic. They said, why don't you kids do a make-believe animal? This was before some of the stuff that's out there nowadays, but we would kind of create our own animals. So, of course, we're in the rural area, so why not have a cow's head on a horse's body and just goofy stuff. But it was a way of expressing ourselves. So anyway, it's a reflection ultimately of a person. It reflects a person who creates. It reflects something of the artist. And in art, we reflect our interests, our causes, concerns. As a matter of fact, a lot of art has become and is perhaps always to be somewhat political, believe it or not, because it's expressing something of our time. Our capabilities, even our personalities, even our ego, our arrogance, and our pride could be seen here. That's why it's a little vulnerable to be showing pieces of work that I've done, because you're going to find out something maybe about me in them. And often for me, I'm thinking they're going to see my kind of core wound is they're going to see my inadequacies. So that comes out to me quite often when I do art. I think, well, what's that? I don't know, but it's sort of like, well, but it expresses myself. So for Christians, art is the expression not so much of a person, but for us as Christians in our work, we even say our creating is actually pointing to the Creator. When God creates, He makes and creates us. When we create, we are reflecting something of the Creator. So we could say it's a sacrament in the bigger perspective, that creativity itself is a sacrament of God's creativity. So this idea of work and art can direct ourselves and those who view also art towards God. Because that's the other part. In creating it, we become kind of co-creating with God. You might say it sounds a little grandiose, perhaps. But it's the idea that in this creating process, we're reflecting something of God who creates. But even when we view a piece of art, we ourselves are kind of entering into the notion of creation too. So there's aspects of active artist creativity, but even the passive part. Particularly with iconography, most people aren't the creators of icons perhaps, but most people will appreciate meditating with that religious object in their own kind of prayer time perhaps. So you could say it is a way of creating even in contemplating. This movement or direction leads to the creator and the one viewing the creation, to the transcendentals. We probably learned those somewhere in our philosophy. Beauty, goodness, and truth, right? So we can hopefully see something about them. Then we're able to see ourselves being directed even to God. Now, this Father George, in his article, which I can't find, he says ultimately in it, by our baptisms, we are all artists. And I think he was making the point that connected to the new creation that baptism says about us, then our own lives are to be expressions of that new life. So we are creating a new life, you might say, by our baptism. Again, I could find the direct quote when I get the magazine. Sister Mary, you can forward it to everybody. But I think the idea was there, though, that it's in us that we can be creative. Christian artists' expressions, they're rooted in the mystery. We made a little hint about it today in the ordinary talk that I talked about this morning, in this idea of the incarnation. Because there's a big controversy about churches shouldn't be having images in them because that's idolatry. And we should be serving God alone, and so images are worshiping the false God. But we're saying God entered into our human family in Jesus. That incarnation says that means flesh and blood, oil and paint and clay. These are not insignificant. These are the very ways that God entered into our world in the creation that he made. So incarnation is kind of a basis for why we look even at things of art as important. God took on flesh, so all the created things, even flesh and blood of humanity, are ways to be directed to God. So we could even say by our own life, what are we pointing to? Hopefully it's to the Creator. And aren't we called by our own creation to be reflections of God and the world? That's kind of a deep concept, but that's the idea. This is why images of saints are able to be depicted and defended in the Orthodox and even our Western churches. Religious images are not idolatry. But some of our more fundamentalist people might see that as a form of idolatry, but we understand it as appropriate. Christian artist creations are rooted in the Holy Spirit, because we would say it is that Spirit of the living God who continues to inspire plans and ideas, executions, visions, bringing substance from nothingness, or thoughts to be expressed. I can only think of you, Sister Donna Marie, about music. Where did that song come from? Servite song. Inspiration. And how do you describe that exactly? How do you express it? Yeah, blankety, like, what's that about? So yeah, even that part, like, there's a whole part of the creativity. I shouldn't have ever started this. That would ruin my life sometimes. Why am I doing this? But there's something impelling us, and we say that's spirit-driven. So there are ways for us to be directed to God even through these mediums by the Holy Spirit, bringing substance from nothingness, thoughts that can be expressed. So we use various mediums, and this is where we can use oil and watercolor and pencils, clay, stone, metal. Where if we're writers or musicians, we use poetry, we use prose and rhyme. For architects, we build. We utilize the things to express something of this desire in us to be co-creating. Our Christian faith professes that God creates from nothing. We can't quite do that. Artists can't do that, but they can take on the ordinary creations of the earth. Something, nothing things like minerals, we find there's color in them. So then we can use them for painting and for expressing color. Wood and plant fibers, animal skins, things of the earth, to create new things. In this Christian artist, the artist is able and privileged to create because they acknowledge that it was created by their Creator and sharing in the divine image. We ourselves are able then to create the divine image that is of the Creator. So again, we would hope that we ourselves direct to the Creator our lives, or even our creations are pointing us to something beyond ourselves. Our sharing in creation is similar to even a man and woman, husband and wife, sharing in creation and bringing forth new life. So the beautiful teaching of our faith is that husband and wife are co-creators with God and bringing forth our lives. So it's that beautiful image of ongoing creation, creating with God. Now, the other part is we realize probably not all artists, that's what I was saying, are people of faith. So they may not always see themselves sharing in the work of the Creator, or they're not going to profess it that way. And yet, as people of faith, we can recognize that we share in co-creating with God, and any human being who is in that phase of creating, whether they're believers or not, they are still somehow creating, and they're pointing us to our Creator. Now, I suppose many artists may not be faith-filled. That seemed to be, though, the insight that was okay with Pope Paul VI. I was kind of impressed. This was way back, right before I was ordained a deacon in '79. I happened to be in Rome, or coming back from studying in Israel. Privileged to be able to go to Rome and see the museums there. But one of them was on modern art, and there wasn't a lot of positive appreciation maybe about the modern art. I don't know why I have kind of mixed feelings about it myself. By that time, I had studied art when I was in college, and a lot of art was sort of a little out there, let's just say. And so, anyway, but the insight of Paul VI was we need to have the church also appreciate the creativity of our time, even in the modern art. So I think one of the things that still holds on to me when I see the crucifix, I think John Paul II still used it, but I think it was the one that Paul VI used, and it was done by a contemporary artist. So people say, well, that's not as realistic as I would like, and you get into our own kind of judgments about things. But it was a current expression of the Crozier. So anyway, that's kind of an example where I thought he valued our modern day expressions of creating things, that they weren't necessarily satanic or unimportant, but they were expressions of our time and our age, and important to express. So we will say probably some things, we've seen some art that's actually almost anti-faith, mockeries. I remember some of that. Maybe you remember some of those times too, of hearing someone created an image of Mary, and it was like an insulting image of the Mother of God. That became almost an expression of a person's lack of faith. But those things would happen too, and that's what happens, I guess, with creativity. It can be directed or kind of misdirected in how it's used. But as people of faith, we also realize that not all art is something that leads to, that's what I was just talking about here, that we can sometimes actually emphasize the ugly, the sinful, and those things of darkness. I often think, even with the movie industry these days, I don't go to many movies. I'm not trying to be anti-social, but I don't see them as very life-giving, some of the images. The darker they are, somehow it attracts people, but I don't know how helpful it is for my soul. Or even some reading. Some authors, to me, are dark, and I don't want to be pulled into that. So maybe I'm a little bit Pollyannic, but I think there's ways you can find things that nurture ourselves too in art and creativity, because the creativity part isn't bad. It's how it is rooted in us and what is it expressing. In Catholic terms, like I was saying earliest on here, it might be considered sacramental. I've had a great sacramental theologian, or not theologian, but professor up at St. John's in Collegeville, the readings he had me looking at had a broader perspective of sacramentality. That the whole world, and this would be a Franciscan notion, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. So why limit it to that? There's something bigger. So the idea of creativity is big in this idea, I think, of being sacramental. It points to realities beyond what is immediately seen, and it can be something that directs us to God. Do any of you remember Sister Wendy Wright, a Carmelite nun? Yeah, she would be around, I think this little nun, I don't know what she's doing here, but she'd be in these art museums and meticulously study all sorts of art. I was always impressed that she didn't land in one arena. She would take more classical pieces of art and study and reflect on them, and then also contemporary art and reflect on it, and find in it lessons that encouraged her as a person and woman of faith. So I just found that to be intriguing. But interesting with her, because I shared a little bit, I kind of find myself eclectic because I borrow from a little bit of every spirituality. I can't land. The Carmelites are big into contemplation, would be the word I use. Well, there it is. Why not contemplate the art? So she'd be the one by viewing it. She didn't create it. But she said, if this is an art piece, let me contemplate it. And then she'll find it. She did a beautiful reflection on the prodigal son, the return of the prodigal. All these rich images that she would find just by being with that image. So I'd say art and creation, and even then the viewing of art, can lead to a contemplative prayer. So, I suppose you could say, well, why do you need to go to an art museum? But it can be to inspire us ultimately. I have to say, I went to the thing now just recently, and I got a little more time, and I retired, to Joslin. And I have to say I wasn't overly impressed with the new modern section. It's like, this is a big space for what? So I was a little more critical, I suppose, about it. Where did I find myself landing? In the classical places of the art museum. Because there's something there that I still find kind of enriching. Whether it is some of the Renaissance painters and things to that. They don't have a large religious art section in there, but there's some. And so we have to find that art and religion have always been at least able to express for one another. Anyway, this idea of viewing is also particularly apparent in the traditional aspect of the icons. That's where prayer is ultimately kind of helping create the image of the icon, and the true iconographer is fasting and really deeply entering into mortifications as they create, so that they're not distracted by their humanity, but open to God creating. I haven't really created mine with all of that much prayer and focus, so look out. I use a line that's probably not reverent at all, but I say mine may be heretical, okay? Because they're not necessarily done in that purest form. Who was sharing, I think, sister, you were sharing, you went to a workshop, and I have nothing against them. I would say mine's an iconographic style, because the true iconographer, I don't want to dismiss, but it's done differently. Very much wrapped in prayer and then zip it. The whole thing is pretty intense. But out of that comes beauty and then further contemplation too. But the prayer, that contemplation moves one who creates it beyond time and may even experience a glimpse of eternity. And some of you have done creative things. It's like you're caught in a timelessness almost as you're in the image or as you're creating something. Perhaps you've had that experience. I'm lost in time. It might happen in reading or so too, because you're kind of brought out of yourself. And that's kind of an experience that can happen in contemplation of religious art as well. Perhaps in your art you've experienced being lost in time beyond your own time and even as you're creating. So I think that was what I was just emphasizing. So I'm going to talk about these three mediums, and that's going to be kind of what I'm talking about today. We're not going to do much with them. The other experience we're going to do on Wednesday will be do a little creativity here, but no mess. This won't be a messy art project. Unless you're messy, I don't know, but it shouldn't lead to mess. We won't use any dyes or anything, but we're going to work around the Ukrainian egg idea on Wednesday. But today I'd like to just introduce these three mediums a little bit with ways that you might think about them. And you might all have pieces of pottery right in your own room, or a piece of art that you already have, but it might help you look at it maybe as a way of prayer focus as well. Because for some reason, there's a mystery to me. How I got connected to Ukrainian egg dyeing, I have no idea. Except, I guess I would simply say spirit-driven, but somehow my sister was kind of intrigued by it. She went to a workshop in South Dakota. I saw there was one in Norfolk at the Art Center, because I've always had an interest with art, so I should probably say that kind of up front. So I went to that workshop and I thought, this is neat. I can do this, and it doesn't take a lot of time, because as a young priest associate, I couldn't just say, I'm going to be lounging out for a couple of days doing a painting. So it became a practical way to kind of express myself in this medium of Ukrainian egg dyeing. The idea of pottery, this is, I think I mentioned what I did by study in college. I have an undergraduate degree in art, but it was kind of at that time when art and my idea of painting and stuff was going to be probably a little more traditional, and that wasn't what was being emphasized in my day. So I thought, well, I'm not going to just be throwing paint on a wall or something. I need something different. So I really rooted myself into pottery at that time, because it became something more real, I guess. So I could express myself there. And so pottery, I did become a great potter. I got kind of reintroduced again through a friend of mine, Michelle Stinson. Some of you have known her perhaps, and she kind of reintroduced me back to that. Because I always carried with me wherever, even when I was a young priest, I decided I should get me a potter's wheel and have a kiln. And it moved, well, I couldn't move it very easily. So it was up in my home area, then I eventually moved it to where I have a place now. Anyway. Then the idea of iconography, somebody asked me about why this form of painting or religious depiction. And that happened about 10 years after I was ordained. I was already drawing kind of an iconographic style with pencils, colored pencils. Again, they were quicker. I didn't have to get out the medium or anything and get it set up and take all the time. I could do it quickly. And so I did some creations that were, they're kind of primitive, but they were trying to express something that I was trying to, that in me I wanted to have expressed. And so that was it. Well, then Father Jim Egan of happy memory, he was the servant minister at that time. Remember I said the servant minister, I ended up being that position too. He was like the priest for the priests. And he said, you as a priest, you have an interest in this art. You ought to pursue something on that. So he connected me to an iconographic school in Ligonier, Pennsylvania, under the Antiochian Orthodox Church, which provided a little more of a contemporary way of painting or writing icons. And so that's what latched into my own connection with that. That 1 week workshop basically opened up different opportunities for me to keep growing in that area. So, looking at that, let's look at the icons in front of you. If you want to hold them, you can. They're not real icons. There's 2 of them that are, I think, my prayer icons for my chapel. This one of Christ, the Pantocrator, and then Mary, she who shows the way. Those are actually icons that are in my prayer room. The others that are on the tables are copies of some that I've done. And they are basically different styles and sizes and stuff like that. But the first thing that happens to an iconographer is, I suppose there's something of inspiration. What is the image that I need to write, or that's being asked of me to write? So this idea, how does the image come to me? It comes maybe from an invitation. I think someone just mentioned to me, have you ever done Our Lady of Sorrows? So I haven't, but there's an invitation, so maybe, who knows? There's something planted, an image. It's considered a word of God that is to be expressed in paint. So let's just take that example. I don't know, we probably have images of Our Lady of Sorrows. So there may be some of those that would come to mind. They become what we call a prototype, and we try to maybe get that image, and then we'll probably just transfer it onto a panel. We'll get to that idea of moving. But maybe what I would do in my style is I might even modify it to say, how is this going to reflect, where is it going to be? So I might get to figure out the size and things from kind of this location. So I bring a little more of an artistic background to it. And then maybe you want it to be more personal. Did you have a favorite phrase or something about your order that you would like incorporated, so it can have a little more personalization to the image. That's how I take a prototype, not just copy. You know, some people say, well, you're just copying, Father, you're not really creating. I'm creating by copying. And, you know, I guess we do have a negative view about copying, don't we? Because some of you are sisters, school sisters, you don't copy anymore, okay? I don't copy. Because it's like, you know, they're kind of inauthentic, right? But here, the idea of copying is something has been given to us. So we want to respect it, and it's called the tradition. So an image, like Our Lady of Tenderness, I think in the back, Virgin of the Dawn, in that back example, her tenderness face there is a style that is used when we want to express Mary's tenderness. This other one, She Who Shows the Way, is more stern. Mary has holding Christ and says, get to work, Jesus. Got a little bit of that seriousness about it. And he says, I'm ready to do it. So he's like already mature on that picture, like, let me get grown up, I'm out of here. The other one, there's a tenderness, and that's the humanity part that one expresses more. So there's just even different feelings right there in those images. So the prototype kind of helps inspire, you might say, how the depiction will show up. But even in this sense, so once you have the image, then a board is prepared. And so normally the board, like for instance these two that are the authentic icons, that board was one I did purchase, but some are actually put together by, they have their own wood that they grow, and this would be more the traditional part, and only certain types of trees. I think they still use poplar, but I'm not sure. And then it's also to be reinforced. So there's a whole creation of the panel. And then there's layers of gesso put on it. And I think they will often say there needs to be 7. Anybody hear a reason why 7? Because creation, well, perfect number, and creation happened in 7 days. So this whole idea is like you're entering into God's creation. Does everybody see that when they see that picture? Probably not. When you create it, you go, do I really need to do all those layers of paint? Well, if you're praying, why not? So I do find myself, I don't know, some of those count, was it 2 or was it 1.5? Did I get that all covered twice? Or I'm not, this is where I might be heretical, I'm not specific all the time. Just saying. The board is prepared. So when someone tells me, I wrote this note, I like it because it says, well, Father, how long did it take for you to do that? And I said, as long as creation, 7 days. No, really, how long? You know? But so I don't get into measuring the time so much. But there's prayer that's done in silence or sometimes in music, and interesting for me because I think I'm valuing the tradition. Even if the Ukrainian eggs are part of my background for whatever reason, I will listen to chanting music, usually even the Russian Orthodox sounds more appealing to me than the Greek Orthodox. They do more harmonizations. And I don't know the language, but I know what they're singing because they have translations of the Psalms usually. So it is prayerful, the language itself that is kind of permeating me as I'm creating these images. So then we actually transfer the image. And that was the story you were telling about. Transferring is like, they said you're not quite there, it's like, oh my gosh, even transferring can be a hard thing to do. But there is a part where you're then taking that image given to you, putting it onto the board, which is again part of a process of transferring and ongoing creation. Then it becomes almost unique because our own lines will probably be reflecting us now more than what was created before. It takes the shape, or I should say it takes shape from formlessness, because that first panel is like, by the time it's sanded and everything, it is perfect. If you look at mine, there's going to be some ridges on it. It may not be as smooth as it could be. Some of these, when they do this, they're almost like marble by the time they're all sanded and everything. Very, very finished. But then on this image, then colors are laid down after the image has been transferred. And sometimes, I don't know whether they did it with the traditional way, we just did it with lines. Sometimes I think they actually Skype it in with a marker then too, because that will help put the paint to where it ends, because it's going to be floating colors in there. And if you don't have a little bit of a parameter, it's going to run all over. So, but that's over technical. But anyway, that's kind of what could happen. So sometimes the lines are transferred as lines with carbon paper, but sometimes they're actually Skyped in with a marker or kind of a knife that would cut them in. The darkest colors are laid down first, and this is significant. Some of you might be familiar with toll painting. Have you ever heard of that? Where you kind of start darkest color and you come up to the light. That's a beautiful image of our own kind of faith idea, that out of the darkness comes, light radiates from that. So it starts dark and comes to the light. So that's kind of the process. Then as you keep adding white, the values become brighter. And at the end, there's even enliveners, almost pure white, that are added. And so all of a sudden, this image is like, and it sort of happens by surprise when you're doing it. You go, I didn't recognize this happening. So that part catches the creator a little bit in doing it. And this whole idea is very much in the spiritual part of right from the womb to the tomb, from this idea of beginning in this brightness, going to darkness, and then resurrection comes with this enlivening. So we're probably applying religious terms to all of this a lot, but it's kind of what we can do with an image. So it can teach us even about, I'll call it the mysteries, or I call it the Paschal mysteries. And let's see, gold leaf is applied. Sometimes that's done earlier, but the earliest part of it, but the idea of the gold is always to be a reminder, this is the image of what heaven is, pure light. So usually gold is incorporated in almost all iconography. The destiny of creation is the glory of God, reflected in God's creatures. There is an inscription on almost every icon, so life is given a name. This one is Christ in glory that you have here in front of you, but it's basically representing Jesus Christ would be the name on it, and it's on almost all images of Jesus, his name. And I keep it usually in the Greek language just to respect the tradition. It could look a little arrogant to somebody who says, why do you do that? You don't know Greek, and I don't. I want to respect the tradition. So that one would be an image of Christ in glory. There is no naming of myself on the front of it. I have put names and information on the back, kind of giving a little bit of description about icons, but they're not to be incorporated on the front because it's not you who actually created that. Because remember, God was the creator. You're like the instrument. Oh, a little humbling. Okay. The Renaissance idea, what was that? Who's the artist? And nothing against it, but they would sign their name. But that's not what iconography is about, is it? So then it's actually sealed. So kind of like no more tampering, this creation's done. And it's blessed. In my process of writing icons, I usually set aside kind of 2-hour sessions to kind of do the process. So it's kind of has my way of organizing creativity. How's that sound? And then often even journaling after a session. I put down the blue color, blah, blah. And sometimes it is kind of just stuff that I was doing, but it also enters me into even the writing and reflection by journaling. Do any of you journal? There's a part of that, I don't know, I go back to it a lot, but it helps us as we're praying, maybe, even as we're doing something to journal. Kind of what's happening in my own heart. Quite often, I also face in my creations inadequacies and doubts. So I use the religious phrase, dark nights, when I'm creating. Have you ever started something and says, why did I ever start this? I've been through that. Now, I would say almost every creative thing I've done, now I just realize it's part of the phase, stay with it. You got to go through that almost. That's kind of a Paschal mystery idea too, that you have to stay with even the tougher times. Like, why didn't that proportion, I wish the drawing would have been better. You just go through all this stuff and stay with it. Anyway, that's kind of what I learned. The journaling also allows me to praise God. Usually I relate a word of praise, praise God and His angels and in His saints. Kind of might be a word I write down to that. So that's kind of my idea of just touching in the experience of creating an icon. But we're not going to create one, but you see kind of the process maybe of what goes into that being a prayerful part. And that they can now be even in places where people gather to be drawing them to attention to God. That would be their purpose now, that they can still be creating by being viewed. If you look at the piece of pottery or pieces of pottery on your table, again, some of these probably aren't, but I would say some of these aren't great pieces of pottery, but they are creations made from clay. To make something, again, there's an inspiration. What is it that wants us to create something in? A vessel, a cup, or a pitcher, or a bowl, or a plate. Clay itself is created. It is made from water and dust. That's how you get clay. The workshop that I've done with Michelle was kind of spirituality just around this, actually, of creating things from nothing, or from clay and dust. That we would actually mix the clay or put it in little bags, and everybody was saying, here is my life being created right there in the mud. And from this, the water, the spirit, you might say, and then comes a material that can be formed. Without the water, without the mixing, you couldn't form anything. So there's a lesson in some of that. And then, to get it to be shaped, the wheel, don't ask me why the wheel was created or invented and why it ends up being there, but it's a wheel that actually generates it into a shape that is becoming, that allows for hold water and all these different things. Before you get to that phase of actually creating, you're also wedging it. Well, I kind of mentioned that when you're forcing it together to make it work, it's kind of a violent act, actually, to get that clay into clay, because it doesn't want to automatically. Some of you might bake. My mother used to do a lot of baking. How easy is it to get flour to mix with eggs and stuff? It takes a little bit of beating around, doesn't it, I guess? Some liquiding, some milk or water, whatever, to get it the right consistency. So we'll work there with the wedging. So even there's lessons of kind of preparing and facing difficulties, struggles, all this kind of is part of the process. In the putting it on the wheel, the toughest part for potters, and like I said, I'm not the greatest one at this, is centering the clay. If you don't get it centered, you might as well just forget it. Or create in a different way with clay, which you can do that too. Do wedges, or not wedges, but slabs, and make a nice box. But you can't make a perfect, what you call it, circle thing without being centered. So that's a little bit wedging, meaning you have to kind of force it, but you got to do it gently. So there's a little bit of that. But this idea, when you think about the scriptures, I am the potter, you are the clay. So let me form you. How easy is that? We let God form us. Man, I'm not going that direction. Let me just be a slab. Or slob, whatever. Anyway, it is this element of kind of letting ourselves be formed. And then there is an important part of this called opening up, that you put your thumbs in, and because it's centered, it can be open. How receptive are we? I mean, this is a great meditation on enunciation in the sense of opening up. Huh? You know what? I'm at your command, Lord. I'm your instrument. Make me be what you need me to be. So that's kind of a beautiful image of kind of that openness to God. So there's lessons in all this. Then there is, of course, even with the clay, it itself has to be dried, and it takes some time for that to happen. So really, pottery is a little more of an intensive watching of the clay itself too. So there is one who's watching things happening. You're like the image of a God who's nurturing this fragile clay until it gets fired. Otherwise, it's very vulnerable. So there is that part about that contemplative attitude of even waiting. Have you ever raced or forced things? And if you do in pottery, there's going to be consequences. If you fire a piece of clay that's too wet, it explodes. if you, of course, are not careful, it cracks very easily. So there is a part of delicacy and caretaking about clay. Then there's a firing, and then there's a firing. It's like, stop the firing. You need to fire it. Bisque firing to get it kind of firm so that you can put a glaze on it, and then you can put another firing on it so you get the beautiful colors. I don't know, I guess, sister, a couple of years ago, more beautiful color patterns. I think the blue might be a little more beautiful. I think there's a black that's kind of basic, and some of these browns are earth tones. But there's just different ways these glazes themselves bring the pieces to kind of a completion. The finished product, there can be excitement or discouragement. Some of the look at these and I get a little more discouraged. My walls on a lot of my pottery are too thick. And they're kind of, some of you were doing exercise today, you could pick up some of my pottery and do exercise because there's enough weight in there that, your muscles will be toned very well. But there's a part where I think, Michelle, we were just talking, I think sister, you were talking that way too. She had a finesse about it, which helped me say, you don't have to have all that weight in there. Let it come out. Trust that the clay itself can be, kind of wholesome. So there's lessons in all this, even how I still use the clay. I still do some journaling even when I, in pottery, because when I said when you put it in the kiln, I hope it's working well. I journal during that time, and usually it might be 3 or 4 hours or somewhere in there, not that whole time, but I'll take a time to do some writing or reflecting on. I wonder what's happening in the clay. So some purifying or whatever might be going on. So that's kind of, again, an introduction about a spirituality around that creativity, just of pottery. We're going to move last, and I think this will be it then, the Ukrainian egg dyeing, and we'll spend a little more time on that one probably on Wednesday. But the Ukrainian egg dyeing, I do have a little display up here that shows it, because basically you're starting just with an egg in itself. An egg is an instrument. I use always goose eggs mostly because my hands are a little bigger, but I can use chicken eggs. I've used goose egg or quail eggs, which are very small. And I've also done a couple ostrich eggs more recently. Not quite to the finesse of that, but I should have brought that one. I kind of been doing a practice a long time already, remembering my mother on Easter time with a Ukrainian egg. So some of these are collections from that that are before you today. And anyway, they all start with basically the egg, which is a symbol of life, right? Now, as a kid, on the farm, this was my chore, was to do the chickens or the chicken chores and gather the eggs. I had no idea that I would end up doing eggs, decorating them, but interesting. But yes, you start with that, and then there's a progression, and then this is what we'll look at when we do our little exercise on Wednesday, how there's a phase where this potential of life, the egg, I would like it to say it also can be a reflection of ourselves. And what is that reflection looking like? Well, the artist is inspired to create by studying designs of geometry maybe, or nature, to create a surface of beauty. And perhaps as you start with the creation of an egg, you're beginning with maybe someone, like I remember my mother is kind of a nurturer, so my father, then as he's passed too, now the egg is done in memory of both of them each year. So kind of a prayerful pondering as you look upon what will this image look like. But in every image, you're going to have a basic design, and that's what we'll look at too. What is that basic design or a pattern that's going to be part of this? And there are pattern books all over. But in the end, you end up putting your own pattern. You put one on. But in this, we could say God has a design about each one of us. We all have something about us that's the same, our humanity. What would be the etching of humanity on an egg? The basic structure, probably divided out into the fours or quarters or whatever, but there's all these different ways of dividing. And then you're using different tools to create this because you're going to be using beeswax. There is a very natural item. You're going to be putting wax on this so that you can cover over so that when the wax burns off, what's underneath it is going to be revealed. So you got to think backwards. Any of you backwards thinkers? If you are, this might come easier. because it is kind of thinking opposite. So the first lines you put on, they're going to look black because beeswax, when it gets heated up, turns carbon or black. So you say, I got a black line on there. You got to think, no, that's the white line. Then you're going to put it into another color, and then you're going to put another marking on that. And guess what's under the color? Under the wax is the color, huh? So you keep doing this process. So the last color on these, if you're going to do it, will end up becoming, this isn't probably the best example, because I left a lot of red because a lot of the color on this last one is red, but the last thing is going to almost look black because it keeps getting covered and covered and covered again until you basically have all the colors are hidden. And this is a big mystery in this, that by bringing this, even this piece here, if I brought a candle here right now, that wax would melt off. And guess what's underneath it? The colors, huh? So it is a mystery when you see that happening. You get kind of the awe moment with this. Maybe that's why I like the Ukrainian egg dyeing. I don't know. You get that kind of aha. And then, of course, you'll find some disappointment saying, oh, shoot, I should have. But you can't modify this once it's done. It's pretty much done. I mean, I can do a little touch up where that red can be covered a little more, perhaps, when you kind of touch up, but basically. So in that, I think when we look at it on Wednesday, we're going to look at ourselves, maybe what's God's design for us, and we'll kind of etch something on there. What are some experiences in my life? These might be some of the colored lines that we put in there. And there's a lot of symbols. We're going to be looking at different things. There's a meandering line, and some of these are very geometric. What does that mean, infinite line? Circle. Why are we cross-hatching? The crosses. All of these images are kind of, they can have a spiritual meaning behind them. I have to say, I don't think most people that are maybe doing these eggs are automatically thinking the symbols, but it certainly is inviting everyone who's doing them. They're entering into a contemplative mode because you get caught into it. I'm going to use that phrase as you're doing it. That you put the markings on with this kiska, and you're touching a flame, getting the wax to flow, huh? And the candle is an important part of this. So all of this is an element of creation happening right before you. So I think that's kind of my conclusion part. I have a sentence here again from that article, which I don't have. But it says, art is a participation in God's ongoing action of creation. Good art is inspired. The artist is inspired to create, and thus to be directed, and even to direct others to the creator of us all. Period. Yes?
My question is, do you blow those eggs out?
Yes, the eggs, yeah, they don't, the true purists, there's purists in this too, they don't. And then I've got a couple that still have a hard thing in the middle, because if I roll them, I can feel it in there. The yolk will eventually dry up and become powder. So most people blow them out. And they can be done either before you design them or after. I usually do it before, because afterwards they can get a little messy with yolk and stuff. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of messy procedure with eggs. But, well, yes. You know, not so many, but you're right. There's a fragility about this too, and that's a lesson. And I don't know, I think someone said you could probably be a surgeon. I thought, well, I don't know, I suppose, in a sense, the precision. I'm not overly precise, but when I looked at one of these eggs, I don't know, I had one on one of these tables. I mean, it has so many lines, I go, I don't even know how I did that. But there's a part of that where I guess you just kind of, trust the instrument that you're working with and you create it. Yes, so I know if other people, I'm kind of finished with time we're talking, but you want to ask some questions, that's fine, you don't have to stick around, but that's what, then the Wednesday one will be a little bit more of a, looking a little more at the egg thing, but no mess. Yes?
So have you ever done coil pottery?
Yes, the coil pottery would be another way of doing it without the wheel, but it will create also. And then you basically are rolling it. You've done some of that then?
Yeah.
And there's something about just the process, isn't there? You're entering into something, creating it, putting it together.
It's not perfect. You
It's
know,
not perfect.
The finished product is more, I don't know, rough.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a beauty in that
Mhm.
too.
Yes, and that's the thing about clay, it can be manipulated, formed, yeah, and who's creating it, huh? Yeah. This is the wheel. Yes. Because I turn them over when they get leather hard, and then you can center them again, and then you put the foot on, they call that, the foot. And then I guess this one has my initial in it. It's a little off too, you see, it's not perfect. Don't say that about me, but. Well, thank you for your attention, and we'll see you tomorrow, I guess.
He's a whole different person this morning.
Absolutely.
This was
The same thing.
because I ate lunch with him and we.
So